The invitation came in the form of a sleek embossed envelope with the Club Random vibe, subtle but unmistakable. Jonathan Roumie's team opened it with wary eyes. Comedian-commentator Bill Maher rarely invited guests he didn't plan to challenge. And with the cultural wars building and the societal climate on edge, this invitation felt less like a gesture and more like a gauntlet thrown. Jonathan, sitting in his office after a day of filming, read the invite silently. His expression didn't flicker. "He thinks I'll fold," he said finally, his voice even. "He wants a show." His publicist raised an eyebrow. "You think it's a trap?" Jonathan smiled faintly. "I think it's an opportunity." Bill Maher had taken subtle jabs at him in previous segments, calling him Hollywood's latest moralizer, an actor playing an ideologue, and one of the least battle-tested public figures to wade into serious cultural debate. Now he wanted him on his turf, under studio lights, facing his trademark mix of sarcasm, skepticism, and relentless interruption. Jonathan's team hesitated. "You know how he plays. He'll bait you, cut you off, twist your words." Jonathan's response was calm. "Then I won't let him." He tapped his desk. "I'll come with more than talking points. I'll come with conviction." The show was scheduled for Thursday night, prime time. Social media buzzed with the announcement. Jonathan Roumie versus Bill Maher live. Headlines followed. Can an actor hold his own? Maher versus the man of faith. Sparks expected. Liberal outlets mocked the matchup. The View rolled their eyes, but conservative and faith-based circles rallied. Roumie's going into the lion's den. The day of the taping, Jonathan dressed in a tailored navy suit, sharp shoulders, minimal jewelry, except one thing. A small silver cross necklace resting at his collarbone. His mother's, a reminder of resolve. As his car pulled up outside the Los Angeles studio, the city lights cast a glow over the rainy pavement. Jonathan stepped out, heels hitting concrete with steady rhythm. Inside, Bill Maher was already mic'd up, going over his notes, leaning back in his chair, grinning like he knew something he didn't. "He's an actor," he said to his producer. "He'll fold the second I press him on anything real." He had no idea. The studio lights flared white and blinding, casting long shadows across the glass desk between them. The opening sequence rolled with rapid cuts of world headlines, flashing images of protests, cultural shifts, and Jonathan Roumie himself on set, speaking at a rally, walking confidently through a press line. The music swelled and cut. "Tonight," Bill Maher announced dramatically, his voice dripping with performance, "we welcome someone who's become a central figure in America's cultural discourse. Jonathan Roumie, actor, faith advocate, and some might say the most outspoken traditional voice to emerge from Hollywood today." Jonathan didn't flinch. His posture was straight, eyes focused, hands resting calmly on the glass desk. He wore no earpiece. He wanted no coaching, no delay. Bill leaned forward slightly, a glint in his eye. "Jonathan, let's not waste time. You've made headlines criticizing what you call the erosion of foundational values, the retreat from objective truth, and calling critics of your stance. What was the phrase, soft-handed secularists? I want to ask plainly, do you even understand the damage your words cause? Or do you just memorize lines from a script?" The moment was perfectly orchestrated. A cold question, a smirk, a jab laced with condescension. The crowd behind the cameras tensed. The producers waited for a stumble. Jonathan blinked once, then smiled. "Here's what I understand," he said evenly, "is that truth cuts deeper than performance, and you of all people should know that." There was a pause, short but electric. Bill leaned back slightly, amused. "I see," he said. "So you have come prepared with slogans." Jonathan nodded slowly. "No slogans, just facts and principles. And if you're ready for those, we can begin." Bill chuckled, then turned to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, we might be in for a storm tonight." He pivoted back. "One more question before we dive in. When you're this visible, this polished, and this fiercely devout, don't you ever wonder if you're being used?" Jonathan didn't hesitate. "I'd wonder more if I were sitting here playing neutral while my culture burns." The air in the studio shifted. The opening jab had landed, but not the way Bill expected. The chessboard was already tilting, and Jonathan had made his first move. Bill tapped his pen against the glass desk, the click echoing in the studio like a ticking clock. His smile was wide but sharp. "Let's get into it then," he said. "The erosion of faith, your cornerstone concern. You've stood by it, praised it, and called it protecting humanity. Others call it outdated dogma, even oppressive. Beliefs torn apart, minds freed. Do those words mean anything to you, or is that just progressive noise to you people? Jonathan didn't flinch. Let's be clear, he said. What's truly oppressive is ignoring the societal rot that comes from abandoning timeless truths. What's inhumane is pretending that tearing down institutions like family and faith is compassion, while mental health crises soar and despair deepens. You want to talk about compassion, Bill? Start with the lost and the broken. He arched a brow. So you're saying it's about eternal truth, not outdated dogma? Jonathan nodded. It's about the pillars that hold a society together. You may not value that here in Hollywood, but in America, many of us still believe in bedrock principles. Because a culture without foundations isn't a culture. It's a passing fad. The audience murmured, some approving, others skeptical. Bill leaned forward, sharpening his tone. Let me quote you, Jonathan. If you want to abandon traditional values, you don't belong in polite society. That's a pretty exclusionary statement, isn't it? What about the millions of Americans who disagree with you? They have the right to be wrong, he replied coolly, and I have the responsibility to speak up for the people they pretend to care about. A flicker passed across Bill's face. Part surprise, part intrigue. This actor wasn't rattling. In fact, he was pressing. He shifted topics. Let's talk about woke culture. Another thing you've called a manufactured outrage. You don't believe it's real? Jonathan shook his head. I believe it's real. I also believe activists use it to silence dissent, push agendas, and control people's thoughts. You don't need to burn free speech down to save a narrative. Bill was quick. That's a line, Jonathan. It sounds good, but you're dodging the societal shifts. No, he said, his voice firmer. I'm rejecting the weaponization of genuine concern. There's a difference. The tension in the room was rising. The chess game was no longer one-sided. Bill had expected to corner him. Instead, he was meeting a wall of control, precision, and unexpected fire. He adjusted his papers, then smiled slightly. I'll give you credit, Jonathan. You don't fold easily. Jonathan leaned in, voice low. You're right, I don't. The moment Bill Maher realized he wasn't in control anymore came when Jonathan Roumie reached into his blazer and calmly pulled out a folded sheet of paper. The audience, the producers, even Bill himself seemed to pause as the actor smoothed it flat on the table. This, he said clearly, holding it up, is a compilation of reports from nonpartisan research groups detailing the alarming rise in despair, mental illness, and family dissolution across America, directly correlated with the decline in community and spiritual engagement. He slid the page towards him. You asked earlier if I understand the impact of our words. I do. This is the impact of abandoning what holds us together. Bill hesitated. He hadn't expected this kind of preparation. Not from an actor, not live. The screen behind them changed at Jonathan's cue to highlight key figures and quotes from social scientists. No spin, just raw stats. The audience gasped as headlines flashed. Teen anxiety soars. Family units crumble. Trust in institutions plummets. Jonathan continued, his voice steely. You want to mock me for being an actor. You want to reduce me to a mouthpiece. But I come armed with the one thing no smear can erase. Truths, historical truths, and the stark reality of our crumbling foundations. The air grew electric. Bill tried to regain footing. Jonathan, facts without context are just tools. These numbers don't show the nuances, the progress. Neither do your glib dismissals, he interrupted. You want to talk context? Then let's talk about the spiritual vacuum, the moral confusion, and the genuine suffering of those you would have us progress beyond. You say I'm rigid for defending timeless principles. I say you're reckless for ignoring the consequences of tearing them down. The studio was silent now. No one shifted. Even the camera crew froze. Then slowly, applause broke out from the audience. Bill sat back, blinking. This wasn't the interview he'd planned. Jonathan wasn't cracking. He wasn't folding. He had just flipped the table, and Bill wasn't sure how to take it. Bill Maher wasn't a stranger to being challenged, but this was different. Jonathan Roumie wasn't reacting the way most guests did. He wasn't defensive, he wasn't spinning, he was leading, and that irked him. He adjusted his jacket and leaned forward again, forcing a smirk. Let's be honest, Jonathan, he said, cutting through the buzz of the studio. All this passion is fine for sound bites, but you haven't answered what matters. You represent a deeply controversial cultural push. The cultural wars have torn America apart like no other. Cancel culture, ideological rigidity, chaos in the streets. How do you defend that and still call yourself a voice for unity? Jonathan gave a short breath, not quite a laugh, but close. You think unity comes from agreeing with you, he asked. That's not unity, that's submission. The audience shifted, sensing something bracing coming. True unity, Bob, he continued, comes from telling the truth even when it's unpopular. I won't lie to Americans to make elites feel comfortable. That's not my job. That was the last cultural administration's specialty. Bill raised an eyebrow, but Jonathan wasn't finished. You talk about division, but division didn't start with those who hold traditional values. It started when common sense and faith were ignored, laughed at, silenced, called bigoted. My perspective didn't divide them. It gave them a microphone. The room was hot with energy now. Applause broke out again, louder this time. Bill's jaw tightened. So you're saying, he shot back, that traditional values heal America? I'm saying, Jonathan replied, that they force America to confront what it had ignored for too long. He picked up the report again and held it aloft, unwavering. I'm not causing the fire. I'm pulling the alarm. Bill sat back, gripping his pen a little harder. It was supposed to be a pressure interview, a takedown, a moment to show an actor's limits. Instead, Jonathan was rising with every challenge, unshaken, unflinching, turning every jab into fuel. The rhythm of the interview had shifted, and Bill knew it. The crowd knew it. And worst of all, so did Jonathan. Bill Maher straightened in his chair, a hint of agitation tightening his posture. The smooth showman's charm was cracking. For the first time in the segment, he glanced off camera as if to signal producers. Or maybe just to collect himself, but Jonathan didn't give him the space. You look surprised, the actor said, his tone controlled but edged. Did you expect me to flinch, to fold like one of your hand-picked Hollywood guests? Bill shot back quickly. I expected you to come prepared, but I didn't expect you to turn this into a sermon. Jonathan smiled. That's where you're wrong. I didn't come to preach. I came to correct the record. And clearly, he gestured at Bill and the room around them. That's long overdue. The studio was thick with silence. The audience wasn't clapping now, but only because they were riveted. A storm was brewing under the surface, the kind that made people lean in and stop scrolling on their phones. Bill leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Let's talk about the growing intolerance on your side, Bow, then. The demonization of wokeness, the push for traditionalism. How can you justify standing behind those who inspire that kind of cultural aggression? Jonathan didn't blink. I'll never justify true aggression, but I will ask a fair question. Why don't you bring this same energy when faith is mocked? When traditional beliefs are deemed hate speech? When people lose careers for holding views that were mainstream a decade ago? Bill began to interject, but Jonathan pushed forward. Here's the truth, Bill. Cultural intolerance is wrong, period. But selective outrage is worse. It divides people, devalues genuine dialogue, and makes a mockery of unity. There it was again. That balance, not dodging, not appeasing, just reframing the debate on his terms. You think you're above hypocrisy? Bill pressed. You've never wavered, never misjudged? Jonathan leaned forward. Of course I've made mistakes, but defending the truth isn't one of them. The lights above flickered slightly, cameras still rolling. Bill looked at him, not as a flustered guest, not as a punchline, but as something else entirely. A real opponent, the kind that didn't back down, and the kind that just might be winning. Bill Maher had faced titans, cultural icons, politicians, Silicon Valley billionaires. But something about this moment felt different, not just tense, volatile. Jonathan Roumie wasn't posturing. He wasn't deflecting or pleading or hedging his words like most guests did when the pressure was on. He was gaining ground and Bill felt it. He leaned forward slightly, shifting his tone from smug to sharp. Let's be honest, Jonathan, he said, cutting through the buzz of the studio. All this passion is fine for sound bites, but you haven't answered what matters. You're an actor, you're idealistic, but people wonder if you're just a mouthpiece for a movement. Are you truly capable of thinking for yourself, or are you just echoing ancient texts with a charismatic face? The jab was cold and calculated. There were murmurs in the audience, a few gaps. Even the producers behind the glass looked up from their monitors. Jonathan didn't blink. Slowly, he turned toward Bill, his hands resting on the desk. Is that what you think? He asked quietly. That I'm just decoration with a teleprompter? Bill shrugged, pretending casualness. I think a lot of viewers are asking. That's when he moved. His hand clenched, his spine straightened, and with a sudden, powerful motion, Jonathan slammed his fist on the table. Thud. It echoed across the room like a gavel in a courtroom. The crowd jumped. A few people clapped reflexively. Bill flinched, not out of fear, but because he knew he'd lost control of the interview. You want to talk about independence? Jonathan's voice rose, not shouting, but fierce and unwavering. I walked into this building without a script. I sat in that chair knowing you'd try to rattle me, and I'm still sitting here, louder, clearer, and freer than you ever expected. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on his interviewers. I don't carry water for a political party. I carry truth, and if that truth scares people like you, maybe it's because you're not used to hearing it from someone who doesn't apologize for believing it. The audience erupted. Some stood. One person in the second row yelled, "That's right!" Bill tried to cut in. Look, no one, but Jonathan wasn't finished. I represent the millions who were told they were too rural, too religious, too traditional, too conservative to matter. You call it noise. I call it a voice, and that voice, it's not going away. I am that voice. In that moment, Bill Maher, a man who prided himself on controlling the room, was reduced to silence. The silence following Jonathan's words wasn't empty. It was charged. The air inside the studio felt electric, like the seconds before a thunderstorm. Bill Maher, ever the showman, instinctively knew the moment had spiraled out of his grasp, but he wasn't ready to concede. Not yet. He adjusted his tie and gave a thin, calculated smile. Quite a performance, he said, his voice laced with irony. But is this cultural commentary, Jonathan, or theater? Jonathan exhaled softly, almost like he'd been expecting the deflection. It's theater, he said calmly, but only because people like you have turned real moral debate into entertainment. He paused, letting his words simmer. I came here to talk about what matters. The erosion of faith, the decline of reason, the loss of communal bonds. But you want to make it about optics, about personality, about whether an actor can handle the pressure. Well, here I am, still standing, still answering, and I haven't ducked a single question. The audience began clapping again. Bill waved a hand, trying to bring the temperature down. Okay, but let's back up. No, Jonathan said sharply, standing now. Let's not back up. Let's move forward. He turned toward the live camera, his voice steady but emotionally raw. I want every person watching this, every believer who's been mocked, every traditionalist told to sit down. I want them to see this moment and know they're not alone. You're not crazy for believing in foundational values. You're not wrong for demanding respect for faith or protecting timeless institutions. And you're not weak for crying out when your voice is dismissed. Bill leaned forward, a note of tension in his throat. But Jonathan, anger isn't a strategy. This isn't anger, he snapped. This is clarity. And clarity sounds loud when people have spent years covering their ears. Someone in the front row stood up and clapped. Then another. The crowd was shifting, not just in energy, but in allegiance. Even some who hadn't come in as fans were nodding now. Bill tried one last time. But you're an actor, not a policymaker. Jonathan smiled. Not yet. The room exploded with cheers. What happened next was beyond even Jonathan's expectations. As the live segment ended, and Bill stiffly turned to camera with his scripted closing line, the audience remained standing. Some chanted his name softly, others just stared, stunned by the shift they had just witnessed. But the real storm didn't start in the studio. It started online. Before the lights cooled on set, Jonathan's fiery monologue was clipped and posted on X, gaining 300,000 views in under an hour. The moment his fist hit the table, captioned, "This is when he took control," spread like gasoline on dry brush. Young people shared it with the quote, "He didn't break, he broke them." Conservative influencers hailed him as the new face of unapologetic traditionalism. Liberal accounts scrambled to minimize the moment, calling it performance art, but even they couldn't ignore the numbers. The clip dominated trending topics by midnight. Hi, Roumie one, hashtag Mama I'm folded. Cable news panels lit up in real time. Fox News called it a seismic moment in cultural media. Newsmax aired it 4 times in 1 hour. Even MSNBC couldn't resist showing the confrontation with the disclaimer, "Viewer discretion advised, contains heated exchange." Back in the green room, Jonathan sat quietly with his team. His phone buzzed nonstop. Dozens of missed calls and texts. Faith leaders, cultural conservatives, youth advocacy groups, all asking the same thing. How did you pull that off? Jonathan simply said, I didn't blink. A producer from another major network knocked on the door. We'd like to have you next week, prime time. No restrictions. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he opened his phone and read the last notification, a post from a prominent cultural conservative. Jonathan Roumie just crushed it on Bill Maher. No one could have done it better. He's not just an actor playing a part. He's the future. His staff froze. This wasn't just viral heat. This was the spark of a national cultural shift. Jonathan looked up, calm as ever. Tell them I'll be there, but next time I'm not coming as a guest. As the morning after the interview dawned, America was already split, but energized. Cable news anchors scrambled for a narrative. CNN labeled it confrontational. The New York Times ran a column asking if Roumie had gone too far. But in coffee shops, college dorms, and construction sites across the country, people weren't talking about Bill Maher. They were talking about Jonathan Roumie, the actor. The clip of Jonathan slamming his fist on the table hit 12 million views by noon. TikTok edits paired his stare down with music from Gladiator and Interstellar. Gen Z influencers who had never engaged with traditional faith reposted the moment with captions like, "You don't have to agree with him to admit he owned that room." Fox News invited him back for an exclusive. CPAC organizers called. Turning Point USA announced he'd headline their next rally. The conservative and faith-based movement didn't just embrace him, they rallied behind him like a rising star. At his agent's office, a source leaked to The Hollywood Reporter that a prominent cultural conservative personally called him that morning. "Jonathan, you've got fire. We need more of that. You didn't just defend a worldview, you made it look powerful. Keep going." And Jonathan would, but not to defend anyone this time. He had become more than an actor. He was now a symbol. Later that week, he walked into a press event in DC. No teleprompter, no notes, just the same black suit and that simple silver cross around his neck. Cameras flashed, microphones extended. Someone asked if he'd go back on Bill Maher's show. Jonathan smiled coolly. "Next time, he'll come on mine." The crowd laughed, then applauded. He turned and looked directly into a Fox camera filming live. This isn't about yelling, it's about not backing down. And if you're someone out there who's been told to sit down, keep quiet, or wait your turn, I'm telling you, your turn just arrived. The room erupted. Jonathan Roumie didn't just win an argument that night. He forged a path for a new kind of leadership. Unapologetic, bold, and impossible to ignore. As the feed faded out and the headlines continued to roll, one truth had become crystal clear. He didn't fold. He flipped the table, and the nation watched. What you just witnessed wasn't just a clash between two strong voices on live television. It was the moment the script flipped. In a world where power often silences principle, Jonathan Roumie showed what it means to stand your ground, speak your truth, and shake the room doing it. He didn't cave under pressure. He didn't beg for approval. He didn't fold. He fought. This wasn't just another interview. It was a declaration. So if you've ever been underestimated, sidelined, or told you are not strong enough, remember this moment. Remember that sometimes all it takes is one voice, one table slam, and one undeniable truth to shift the entire conversation. And if you want more moments like this, real, raw, and impossible to ignore, make sure to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications because we're just getting started.